From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melithopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. We take a certain pride here at Pollination in bringing you stories of pollinators that you're just not going to hear about elsewhere. And so my ears perked up when I got the following email from one of our listeners. She writes, "There's one topic in which I've noticed has not received an episode on or has really been mentioned, kleptoparasitic bees. I know that the majority of pollination is focused on how bees act as stewards for ecosystem services and less on the bee life histories, but I believe that the topic of kleptoparasitism is incredibly underrepresented in the pollinator realm and can have some interesting implications regarding pollinator communities and thus pollination itself." Well, I really wanted to get this person on our show, and I'm bringing you today a podcast with Casey Hale. Now, Casey is a lab research technician in the Padeva lab at Cornell University, and this is a really interesting episode telling you about the kind of some of the broad strokes of how bees that parasitize other bees live, not only the ones that live on solitary bees, but also social parasites, bumblebees that are parasitic on other bumblebee species. It's a fascinating episode, and I'm glad to finally bring you this glimpse of something that I think you're never going to hear anywhere else. Hope you enjoyed the episode. So I'm very excited to have Casey Hale here from Cornell University. Welcome to Pollination.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really glad to have you. And on past episodes, we've learned a little bit about the twists and turns that evolution has wrought on pollinators. But one feature we've really neglected is the real prominent role that has played a role with bees, and this is the evolution of kleptoparasitism. Can you begin by just giving us a sense of how the life of a kleptoparasitic bee is different from that of the bee that we've talked about on previous episodes?
Yeah, of course. So first thing I want to feature is that there are a lot of different terms for kleptoparasitic bees. So if I refer to them as different things, I just want to make that clear. So kleptoparasitic bees is synonymous with cuckoo bees and even brood parasitic bees. So those terms all mean the same thing.
Okay.
So kleptoparasitic bees are a lot different than the bees that we know and love. So most bees will spend a lot of time collecting floral resources, so nectar, pollen, and floral oils. And they, I'm just talking about solitary bees here. I'm not talking about you social bees, but
okay.
Solitary bees will make their own nests. They will, depending on where they live in the ground or in stems, they will provision a cell and put an egg in it, and they'll have many cells in one of their nests. And they spend a lot of their time collecting these floral resources to put in with their larvae so that they have something to eat.
Okay.
Kleptoparasitic bees don't do this. They actually don't really spend a lot of their time collecting floral nectars and pollen. What they do is they are actually kind of robbing in a way. So they will find these solitary bee nests, the nests of these bees that have taken all of this time to, excavate a nest and collect all these resources. So these kleptoparasitic bees will find this nest and actually go into it and lay their own egg inside of a cell in these nests. So they don't have to collect all of these floral resources and spend the time creating the nest themselves.
Sneaky.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's actually very smart. And most commonly, the adult will go into the nest, lay, its own egg, and then the invading egg, when it hatches, will kill the host larvae or the host egg itself that is already in the nest, and then will utilize the resources inside of this nest, inside of the cell, and develop that way.
I imagine this is a tough lifestyle. I was just thinking, I wouldn't want to go down a dark hole and take my chances and slip it, but they must highly evolve to this lifestyle. I can totally see the benefits of it. Why? How common is this? I mean, it seems like a good deal.
Mhm. So it's actually a lot more common than what you would think. So kleptoparasitism is a life history character that is in about 12 to 13% of all bee species that we know. So
Really? That many?
yeah, it's quite a lot. And so, you know, we have 20,000 species of bees that are described currently. So that's what, 2,400 species of kleptoparasites, which is actually more common than eusociality, which is what we think of when we think of bees themselves.
Wait a second. So let me get this straight. So, and I know we've talked about solitary bees. We had Dr. Brian Danforth on about his new book, Solitary Bees, and we know that they're, a prominent. But most of our listeners think about social bees as being, the first thing that they encounter. They encounter a honeybee or a bumblebee. You're telling me that kleptoparasitism is more common than in terms of species than social bees.
Yes. Yep.
Huh. Well, be darned. That is amazing. So, so I'm coming back to that kleptoparasitic bee that goes down a solitary bee nest hole, or I imagine this is a tricky. This is not for the faint of heart. Their evolution's probably exerted a lot of pressure on these bees. How are they different morphologically in their behavior? Tell us a little bit about that dimension.
Yeah. So I'll start with the evolution of them. We don't really know the exact mechanisms of how kleptoparasitic bees evolved, but current estimates show that there are up to 31 independent origins of kleptoparasitism within bees. So
Well, let me get
that's
this straight. So there's not just like one line. It's evolved multiple times.
many, many
Ah,
times.
31. Okay. Okay, keep going.
So uh, because these bees have evolved so many different times, there are a lot of different characters that they have. But one kind of rule that most of them have, it's called Emery's rule. And it's that kleptoparasites will parasitize bees that are extremely closely related to themselves. So it's really rare to have a kleptoparasite that has a host that is outside of its own bee family. So that gives us a lot of detail into maybe how these guys evolved, or ladies evolved, I guess I should say, because it is a female that is laying the egg, right? But this shows that kleptoparasitism may have evolved when individuals decided to take advantage of their own conspecifics and then slowly evolved into their own species, which is why they're so closely related.
And I can imagine as well, they bring along that evolutionary skill set of navigating that, either cavity nesting system or ground nesting. That they somewhere in their behavioral, they've got some understanding how this whole thing works.
Yeah, I mean, because they're so closely related, they have very similar floral resource needs. They eat the same pollen, right? Because they have.
Oh, right. So because these bees have very specific nutritional demands, their physiology is adapted. Uh, that
Mhm.
would be switching to a completely different host might have all sorts of changes they'd have to make.
Yeah,
Ah,
exactly.
okay.
And within these radiations of bees, there are actually some families that don't have any kleptoparasites at all. So right now, like Andrenidae and Melitidae don't have any known kleptoparasites, whereas some of the large families, such as Apidae, have many, many different radiations of kleptoparasitism within them.
Okay, and I guess that brings up a couple things. I do remember we had an episode with Jim Kane, and he was talking about Nomia not having kleptoparasites, and that's why we have these huge nesting aggregations in eastern Oregon, is because otherwise those populations would collapse because there'd be an influx of the kleptoparasites into the population.
Yeah. And then I think your second part of that question was the behavior and morphology. Is that correct? correct, of these
It
bees?
is, but I also just wanted to mention the other thing is that there seem to be these groups like Adrenidae that do have kleptoparasites, but they're from another group. Like there are these. So isn't Nomada go after?
Yeah, so Nomada, they're in, I believe in the family Apidae.
So that's the rare situation where this one group, the Adrenidae, don't kick off their own kleptoparasites. Some
Yeah,
other group has figured it out from another
yeah,
lineage. Okay.
yeah. And then Nomodines are actually the largest evolution, rapid evolution of this kleptosphere, the largest group, I guess you would say.
Okay,
Yeah.
we got into the weeds there a little bit, but just so yeah, come back to that question. I did wonder about how they're different, how they're if you how they've when you make that step evolutionarily to kleptoparasitism, are there some general trends in terms of morphology or other other things that change?
Yeah, so definitely morphologically, these bees need to have different tools to utilize their different life histories. So some of the surefire characteristics of these kleptoparasitic bees involve not having a scopa. So a scopa is a mass of these elongated branched hairs that bees use to collect pollen, very efficiently. And because these kleptoparasites aren't collecting a lot of pollen themselves, they don't collect these resources for their developing larvae. They don't need to have this hair, so they have a general loss of the scopa in this hair,
Hmm.
which makes them look very wasp-like, and so they're often mistaken for wasps by people that aren't aware of this life history. Um, some of the other morphological things, characters that they have, including having a thicker cuticle, which isn't necessarily something you can see, but it acts as an armor against, maybe their hosts that, maybe they're in the middle of parasitizing a nest and, the host mother comes back. They need to have a way to get out, right? So the larvae of these kleptoparasitic bees will often have really large sickle-shaped mandibles that they use to attack and kill the larvae and the eggs of their hosts so that they can utilize the resources within the nest.
Oh, right, because
Um,
otherwise there'd be two of them eating the same pollen ball or something. So they get rid of. Okay, all right.
Mhm. Yeah. And they also will have like a very strong sclerotized head in addition to that to kind of take these punches, I guess you can say. As spiders.
That is something I do wanna see on YouTube. I wanna see, like, a kleptoparasite and the host kind of like, going at it on a pollen ball. That'd be cool.
That would be cool.
Alright, so it'd be very slow, a slow pollen ball fight, though. I imagine it's like punk, punk. Have you ever
Mhm.
seen it? Have you ever seen them do this?
I have not. So
Huh.
one of the things about these bees is that it's really hard to study them just because they are so specific and you have to, dig up a nest and likely there probably isn't going to be a kleptoparasite in this nest. And if there is, it's hard to tell. Their larvae look very similar other than, the mandibles. Um,
Mm.
really hard to tell. Usually, the kleptoparasitic eggs are smaller than their host eggs, just so they can be kind of more sneaky within the nest. But yeah, I've never actually seen it with my own eyes. Um, yeah, but that's something that I would love to see in the future.
What do we know about the adult behavior? I mean, we often see it here in Oregon. We'll have our on the lawns, we'll have adrena start to pop up, and we'll within a few days we see the flies, um, the robber flies show up, but then we see the kleptoparasites kind of hovering around. Do they have a behavior? Are they kind of like waiting for the female? Are they patrolling
Mhm.
all these nests? Like, tell us how they find these nests too. They must be hard to find.
Yeah, so the adult behavior, oftentimes you will find these kleptoparasites kind of scouring the ground, close to where the nests actually are that they're looking for, trying to find their hosts. So most of the time you have to look down to see them rather than look straight at a flower. They do still collect floral resources because they do still have to eat themselves.
All right.
So most of the time when I've seen them, I have seen them on flowers. But I have also seen them, scouring the ground too, which is really exciting to see when you know what they're trying to look for and what they're doing.
We the other I think for people who manage mason bees out here, we do have Stelis pop in, and I remember the first time I saw that these are not just in the ground. Some of them are on cavity nesters, and I remember I thought, man, these are small little males. And then somebody pointed out, no, those are not males because they look exactly like the mason bees in almost all ways, except they're smaller.
It's very interesting to see, and it's exciting once you know what they are. You'll remember that and you'll see it. I remember this past summer I was outside just collecting, and I was looking at this patch of goldenrod, and I found a nomada just feeding on the nectar, presumably for herself. And on the same plant in Andrina, which is their host. So it was really interesting to see these two bees. Obviously, the nomada wasn't trying to try to find a nest, but it was interesting, that this host and this kleptoparasite were right next to each other.
They're like, I'll see you later. Or maybe not.
Yeah.
You won't see me again. I'm sneaky. Okay.
Yeah. I thought it was really fun.
It strikes me that we had an episode with August Jackson, who has a book out on bees of the Willamette Valley. And I think that was his, if I remember right, he had his favorite photograph was something like that. It was really kind of remarkable to see the host and a kleptoparasite on the same flower just hanging out.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Okay, well, let's take a quick break and we'll come back. We've got more questions we want to ask you about these fascinating bees. All right, okay, welcome back. One question, Sarah Kincaid is here. Sarah, many people know, has been a previous guest and also really prominent with the Oregon Bee Project and the Oregon Bee Atlas. And she said, what about these social parasites? We've been talking about these bees that really have close associations with solitary bees. But what about are there kleptoparasites on these social bees?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are social parasitic bees. They are not called kleptoparasites because they do attack socially evolved bees. So they are called social parasites. But these are bees that will get into the hive or the nest of these social bees. They will often kill the resident queen that is in the nest, and they will lay their own eggs in the host cells in that nest. And they essentially forced the host workers of that nest to raise their own young, the young of parasitic bees. And these bees are very similar to kleptoparasitic bees in that, they lack a lot of the morphological features that most bees have, pollen baskets and scope. And they don't forage for food for their own young themselves as well.
Oh, I remember with the bumblebee social parasites that they are also, the females are, you can tell them they have a particular look to them. They're heavily armored. They're designed to take a couple punches, as you say. Yeah. Okay, so here the idea is that there's a workforce already in place, and that you sort of, if you knock off, you do this hand-to-hand battle with the resident queen, and you win the nest, that you could that the colony can make your own queens and your own males, and that you're kind of hijacking the machinery of the... Huh.
And they do this using, they have chemicals that will mimic the chemicals and the pheromones that the resident queen has. So these invaders will create this chemical, and that's how they trick the hive and the workers in the nest to, carry out, helping the parasitic bees young, because they have these chemical signals that their very own queen was producing. before she was killed.
Fascinating. These adaptations are remarkable. I imagine people are going to want to know more about these bees after they listen to this episode. Can you walk us through some of the common bee genera that are kleptoparasitic or social parasites? And are any of them easy to spot in the yard? Can people notice? You mentioned some of them look kind of wasp-like because they've lost some of these features, but some like Stelis may, are harder to pull apart. So tell us a little bit about some of these common genera.
Yeah, so I think the most common genus that you are likely to find is bees in the genus Nomada. So these are the nomad bees. And nomada is actually a word derived from the Greek word nomos, which means roaming or wandering. So
Oh,
that's how you can find these bees. That's how I've seen them oftentimes, roaming around on the ground trying to find their hosts, which are Andrena, which are mining bees. But you can also find these nomada bees on flowers too. I work in strawberry agroecosystems, and we often find them as pollinators of strawberry. And I've seen
really?
them on goldenrod. Yeah, so they will forage on flowers as well, but they're the most likely kleptoparasitic bees that you'll find in your yard, especially if you have flowers. It's less likely that you're going to see them roaming around on the ground just because it is harder to see them, but it does happen if you know what they look like and you know what you're looking for.
Well, I know
Uh,
in Oregon we do we've seen we always have on our social media outreach when we start to see we have a couple schools in Portland that have these great established beds of Adrena, and they're really reliable when you know where they are. And I'll just
mhm.
tell folks a great spot to see them is right outside the Oregon Zoo by the Hoyt Arboretum. There's a whole bed there that has come alive for the last couple of years that you can spot them on. But you have to know you have to be there at the right time and know where to go because otherwise you'd never find these things.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely need to know what they look like beforehand. Um, I guess one of the other very common species or genera of genus of bees, kleptoparasitic bees that you can find are Coleoxys, which are the sharp-tailed bees. They're in the family Megachilidae, and they parasitize megachilids. So these bees, if you look up a picture of them, they're actually very distinct, and they have their tails are the end of their abdomen um, goes into a very sharp point, which makes sense with their common name of sharp-tailed bees. But yeah, they also look very wasp-like, and I've seen them flying around. I've never seen them looking or in a nest or going into a nest, but they are fairly common throughout the United States too. And I think if someone is trying to find, these kleptoparasitic bee genera, if you don't know what they look like, you're not going to recognize them just because they do look like wasps. So I think,
Hmm.
you know, doing your research beforehand and looking up what these bees actually look like and then trying to find them is going to increase your chances of recognizing them when you do see them outside.
Okay, that's a good that's a great point, and I think there are some nice resources around for just recognizing some of these bee genera. I think even on our Bees of Oregon, we have a little postcard that we distribute. We have a Coleoxys on
Mhm.
there and a Nomada. So in Oregon, those cards have these of those 12 bees that we have on the cards. There are you'll have pictures. Sarah's just checking right now. Examples of them, but they are kind of distinctive. And the point of them being some of the bees in your garden that you're most likely to not think are bees.
Yes, yes, very true.
Okay, so maybe just to round things up, do we know how these bees are doing? I imagine, since they depend on host species, they may be a vulnerable group, or maybe some of them doing really well and some aren't. Like, what do we know about this group and status?
Mhm. Yeah, so in terms of how they're doing, we don't really know. There's not a lot of research going on in terms of kleptoparasitic bees in general, so we don't know how their populations are. Just because it is really hard to study them, they are, they're not commonly found, on flowers. They're in some more obscure places and they are underground, and it's hard to dig up these nests and identify them. So we don't know for sure how they're faring, but just because they are directly dependent on the population stability of their hosts, they are likely vulnerable if their hosts aren't doing so well. And so we do have some, data that solitary bees aren't doing as well as we think. So we can make inferences based off of, if their hosts aren't doing well, then kleptoparasitic bees likely aren't doing well, at the same time.
I guess I have two questions to that. The first one is, how specific, host specific are they? Are some of them just to go to one species, or do some of them have broad targets?
Yeah, so both. Most of the
Uh,
time they are very specific, but we also don't know. Most of the kleptoparasitic bees that we know that are described, we don't have host records for them. We just know that they are kleptoparasites because of their morphology. So
uh,
it's in that way, it is also hard to tell, how they're doing. If we don't know their hosts, then we can't make assumptions based off of their populations and if they're declining or not.
and the last thing I was going to say is, I remember when our taxonomist is in town, he tells us that some of these groups are notoriously difficult. There's not very good, very few people can identify them to species. Is that correct? Or some groups worse than
Yeah,
others? Yeah.
yeah, it is very true. And we actually have. It's funny. I went to ESA this a couple days ago, and there was a talk by Silas Bossert, who has worked on these kleptoparasitic bees, and he told the story of we have a large group of unidentified bees in the Cornell insect collection, and he, is finding more and more undescribed species of these kleptoparasitic bees. And I think that just shows that, a lot of people just don't know what they're looking at when it comes to trying to figure out which, kleptoparasitic bees are, already described or not. So we definitely need more people researching them. If we want to gain more knowledge on them, and especially if we want to know if they're doing well or not.
Fantastic. Well, let's take another break, and then we're going to come back. We've got three questions to ask you, three questions to rule them all. Okay, here we go. Okay, we're back. So tell us, do you have a book recommendation for our listeners?
Yeah, so I have two books in relation to kleptoparasitic bees. So one is Charles Michener's Bees of the World. I'm sure many of you have, heard of it or read parts of it. And there's a really good description of kleptoparasitic bees in his book, in the Bees of the
Oh,
World. So that's actually where I started doing research and like learning more about these bees. I think it gives a really good overview of what we know about these bees, which is not much, but yeah, it's a good resource. And then my second bee book is one more for those of you who want to be able to recognize these bees, is Bees in Your Backyard by Joe Wilson and Olivia Carl. Just because it has amazing pictures of these nomata and these Cleoxes, and I think it's a really good resource to be able, for those of you who want to be able to identify these kleptoparasitic bees,
oh,
in outside.
and thanks for that. That's a good plug, because Olivia is coming out to Oregon in the first week of March. She's going to be at our annual bee event, which is out in Lynn County. And she's also going to be at the annual conference for the Oregon Bee Atlas. So thank you for setting that up. It's a wonderful book, and it does those pictures with the white backgrounds and the easy writing style is great. But I always appreciate when somebody can give me a section of Bees of the World to look up. Thank you for the tip. Okay, our next question is, oh, wait a second. We have another book. We were talking at the break. You said, yes, bee book or non-bee book. So you have a third book. What's the third book?
Yeah, so my third book is not specifically a bee book, but it is it is a science book for those of us like myself who are in our early career as scientists, or even just want to learn more about being a scientist. It's called Letters to a Young Scientist by E.O. Wilson. I think it came out a couple years ago, and it's a short book, but it has a lot of really interesting and helpful advice for those of us who want to be scientists but don't necessarily know how, or are just starting, and we have a lot of questions. So it's a very friendly book in that regard, and I like it a lot. It changed my life.
Well, the one thing we haven't asked is what do you do at Cornell? So that's the one thing we've left out of this interview. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I recently graduated with a bachelor's in entomology from Cornell this past May of 2019. And I now work as a research technician in two labs at Cornell. So I work in agroecology and looking at pollinator diversity in agroecosystems. And then I work in another lab quantifying pesticide risk to bees in these systems. So I don't work on kleptoparasitism specifically, but it is a route I am planning on taking in the future for graduate school.
Well, it's really, and that's really interesting and really exciting that there is this kind of at Cornell. It seems like there's a lot of projects that go across both the native bees and the sort of honeybee world. That the McCart lab and the Danforth lab. There seems to be a lot of crossover between some of the projects. It seems like a lot of good stuff going on at Cornell these days.
Yeah. So I work in the Poveda lab and the McCart lab, but I do work with Brian as
Oh, see,
well.
there's a third. Say, there you go. It's hard to keep track of it.
Yeah,
It's just so much going on at Cornell.
yep, yeah, it's a great place for pollinators and bee diversity.
I remember seeing you all at the pollinator conference in Davis, and it was a really big group, and you all seemed to have a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. We were well represented there. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go just because it was in the middle of field season. But yeah, so if you're looking to do pollinator work, Cornell is a great place to do that. We have a lot of resources.
Fantastic. Okay, well, the next question I have, as somebody who works in a lot of different methodologies, your go-to tool must be. I'm really curious what your answer is going to be.
Yeah, so my tool is actually baby powder.
Baby powder.
Baby powder.
Huh.
So we're digging up solitary bee nests. It's very hard to do. Oftentimes, these nests go many feet deep, and they are hard to find. Crumble themselves when you're trying to dig up. It's really hard to find. So you can use
Hold a
baby
second, Casey. I'm
powder
going to start you again.
to.
You garbled up, so I'm going to.
Okay.
Okay, so just start with baby powder.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, my tool is baby powder. So when we're digging up these solitary bee nests, it's really hard. These nests will go many feet deep sometimes, and it's hard to keep track of them. The deeper you go, the more likely they are to cave in themselves.
Yeah.
And so if we have baby powder, we can kind of stuff it into these solitary bee nests, and it coats the walls of the tube, and it's easier to keep track of them.
So let me get this straight. So when you find this nest, and you're kind of, I want to find the kleptoparasite down there or something, you take like a little blower or something, and you blow the baby powder down the hole.
Yep. And because the walls of nests are waxy, a lot of the time it'll stick to the sides, and it's easier to not.
So then you'll take a trowel and kind of like just start coming down, and you'll be able to follow that white thread down.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh. So how long does it take to? I know everybody's ears perked up about this because I want to know how to do this. So how long does it take to excavate a nest?
It honestly depends. When I first started excavating these nests, they were Peponapus squash bee nests, and they go, fairly deep, and it would take, I don't know, an hour and a half to dig up one nest, just because you need to be very careful. The deeper you go, the wider you need to get rid of the dirt around it so it doesn't all cave into the nest itself.
Yeah.
So it can take a while, especially if you're learning. I mean, you can spend an hour on a nest and then have it cave in on you and it's gone and it's hard, you're not going to find it. So
okay, so you need baby powder, patience, a trowel, and what else do you need to do this?
I think those are the three main things.
Okay.
Your pride, maybe make sure you're stable in that sense. If you're spending all this time digging them up and then it caves in, you just don't get mad. Just find another one. Keep going.
Okay. Thanks. That's some really good tips for people who might try to attempt this. Okay. Last question we have is, of all these species, it seems you've got a lot to choose from. Do you have a favorite?
I do. So my favorite species of bee at the moment, I'm sure it will change, is Thyreus Ceylanicus, which is the lilac cloak and dagger bee. So it is.
Is that really its name, the lilac cloak and dagger bee?
Yes. Yep.
Huh.
That's a common name.
I love
and
it.
I have a story. I did a lot of work in Singapore 2 years ago. And I was out and about collecting these bees, and there was this bright blue and black striped bee that I had seen on a flower, and I caught it, and I had never seen anything like it before. And it turned out to be this Thyreus Ceylanicus bee. And it was my first exposure to kleptoparasites. So, this bee is a kleptoparasite of Amygdala in the tropics. And I just thought it was so amazing. It's, iridescently blue. And it just blew my mind. It was so beautiful. And I had such an interesting life history that was really what started my interest with these bees.
Oh, that's a great bee. Not only is it remarkable, but it's also the start of your descent down the kleptoparasitic bee rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. We'll have a picture of the bee in the show notes and all the other links. Thank you so much for taking time to tell us about this really interesting group of bees.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much for listening. The show is produced by Quinn Sin and Neal, who's a student here at OSU in the New Media Communications program, and the show wouldn't even be possible without the support of the Oregon Legislature, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and Western SARE. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on the website, which is at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's several ways to connect with me. The first one is you can visit the website and leave an episode-specific comment. You can suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. But you can do the same things on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook by visiting the Oregon Bee Project. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.